We'd like to thank sponsors The Media Audit, the Blaze Radio Network, and Swell Radio for their support. And next up is our legal panel. But we're not going to make any jokes about lawyers and light bulbs here. Our next panel is sure to be very illuminating, full of bright panelists who will really shine a spotlight on the topic. Here to moderate an enlightening discussion of streaming service royalties and revenues is managing partner at Wilkinson, Barker, Knauer, LLP, David Oxenford.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And thank you all for coming to hear what we hope will be an enlightening discussion of royalties. And it seems like none of you guys can get around without talking about music royalties at some point. I like Jason's comment in his keynote address. What was it? Something along the lines of, once you get anywhere with your music service, the labels will come in and kill the service, something along those lines. We're going to try to talk here about some of the big issues that are out there in the music royalty world. You know, it seems like if you're following these issues, you can't go a day or a week without seeing some big headline. We saw headlines about the ASCAP decision with Pandora recently. We've seen some questions raised by the Songwriters Equity Act for streaming internet radio signals. The new royalty proceeding to set internet radio royalty rates is just beginning and will certainly dominate, I think, conversation for about the next year or year and a half until we see how those rates are revised. We hear royalty services talking about, or music services talking about what royalties they're paying, what percentage of their revenue it's taking up. We see that every time Pandora releases its financial statements. We see it when there's discussions about Spotify going public. So we'll be trying to talk about basically what that means, what the controversies are here. You know, when I was thinking about it, it's very interesting because another thing that we've seen a lot is the songwriters becoming very active and the performers complaining about how little they get from some of the streaming services. At the same time that they're complaining they're not getting enough, the music services are saying that they can't make enough money to survive. And in fact, I was trying to think of dead music services that we've all seen in the last couple of years. And I came up with, you know, not necessarily dead, but ones that have kind of disappeared. You know, remember, for instance, Launchcast and AOL used to be the big streamers 10 years ago. And what happened to them? We've seen Mog disappear. We've seen Napster and the second Napster fold into somebody else. Spiral Frog, remember Spiral Frog? iMeme, Virgin America was another just non-interactive streaming service that James reminded me of when he got here. Who else has a streaming service that's dead that used to be one of their favorites? MySpace Music? Turntable, yeah. You know, they're all over the place. And most of them would say that it had something to do with royalties that meant that they're no longer there. So let's start with some of the complaints that we've seen from the songwriter side of things. David, and we've got too many Davids here. We got three in a row. Actually, let me have the panelists introduce themselves first. David, why don't you?
My name is David Levin. I work for BMI, and I manage our digital licensing group.
And just for everybody, what does BMI do?
BMI is a performing rights organization. BMI, ASCAP, CSAC are three major performing rights organizations in the United States, and they represent the songwriters' performing right and license that for everything from internet radio and digital uses to physical locations, radio, television, broadcast.
Great. David?
David Rosenberg. I'm with Beats Music. I'm one of the lawyers at Beats. I think you probably heard about Beats a lot a panel ago, but essentially we're an on-demand streaming service where people pay $10 a month for access to our catalog, and we have partnerships with a number of distributors like AT&T and Target and so forth. And we're a company that was recently launched in January, founded by artists, Dr. Dre, Trent Reznor, and artist insiders like Jimmy Iovine. And so we're a newcomer to the space right now.
Colin?
I'm Colin Rushing. I'm the general counsel of SoundExchange. SoundExchange is also a performance rights organization unlike BMI. So BMI pays songwriters and publishers. SoundExchange collects the royalties that digital radio services like Pandora and Sirius XM owe to record companies and recording artists.
Great. And Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm the token non-lawyer on the panel. And
I'm not a lawyer either, technically.
Oh, okay, that's true. I run a new model record company called Digsin, which is short for Digital Single. We also have a independent digital marketing company called Digmark, and I wrote a book called Future Hit DNA, which is all about how the structure of hit songs has changed in the digital age.
Great. And by the way, I'm going to take questions as we go along rather than waiting to the end. So if you want to jump into the conversation, sort of stand up and wave a lot until I see you, and we'll get a microphone to you and get you involved in the conversation. So let's start, David. As I was talking about, the songwriters have begun to complain, introduced the Songwriters Equity Act, suggesting that there should be more money flowing in royalties to the songwriters. Can you explain that?
Sure. I mean, I think the Songwriters Equity Act really speaks to, there's a lot of regulation, as you know, and maybe many in the audience are aware as well, in the performing rights, in the recording rights. The government is, creates statutory rates. The government creates in the PRO world, in the performing rights world, we have federal judges who oversee our business. We have a consent decree with the Department of Justice. Both ASCAP and BMI each have their own consent decrees with the Department of Justice that regulates the business. It's a good thing because it enables businesses to get licenses, enables businesses to launch and to have the assurance of a license. It runs into problems when it doesn't keep up with technology, as a lot of government regulations sometimes do. Technology moves faster than Congress, moves faster than the courts sometimes, or the courts are left to pick up pieces. So the Songwriters Equity Act was introduced back in January with a broad support from the PROs, from the recording industry side. And what it essentially does is it tries to loosen some of those regulations so that the process that exists can work in more of a open form. It does two things briefly. It does it eliminates, it enables the performing rights to be set in relation to other rights that are being granted to similar services. And it relaxes on the recording rights side of the business. It relaxes that regulatory board that gets set every 5 years, where they set internet royalty rates, and it allows more of a willing buyer, willing seller negotiation.
Now, so isn't the bottom line, when you talk about setting rates in relations to other services, that you guys have seen what the sound recording folks are getting in terms of a percentage of the revenue of a digital music service for SoundExchange royalties, and you think that the songwriters should be getting a bigger share?
Well, BMI doesn't specifically own any copyrights, as you're aware, and others don't. We are entrusted by the publishers to license their rights for performing rights. There was a lot of press last year, and I'm sure you'll get to some of the withdrawal that the publishers said, hey, look, we think we can do better outside of this government-regulated construct that the PROs have, and they've gone and licensed their own rights, and that is because they feel like there is an inequity that has existed in certain areas of the landscape. And this is really, the Songwriters Equity Act is meant to at least open this landscape up into, a recognition of all the rights that are being granted out there. And I think, my impression of it is that, everybody wants business to flourish. This is not, I wouldn't characterize it, and I'm not saying you were, but leading towards, creating higher rates for the industry. This is about, there needs to be open transparency. There needs to be all partners at the table so that we can have the proper rights that enables the right business growth.
So, Colin, we're just about to start, or we've actually started, a new royalty proceeding to set royalties for internet radio. Are you ready to make some news here by saying that you're going to ask for lower royalties so more can go to the songwriters in this upcoming proceeding? Come on, everybody ready? Everybody got their pens ready?
That piece of news. So what I would say...
Well, I'm sorry, did you say...
So I'm not about to make that piece of news, or probably any other news, and I'm not sure if I'll say anything sort of too surprising. We don't, at SoundExchange, when we've done these cases before, we haven't really thought about our royalties in terms of, in relation to what the songwriters are able to do through the PROs. And our basic belief is that all creators that are participating in this ecosystem should get a fair market rate, or should get fair market value for what they contribute to whatever it is that's being used by other services, whether it's digital radio services, whether it's an on-demand service, whether it's whoever. And so we're supportive of the songwriters in their effort to actually have sort of get something closer to what they believe is a sort of fair rate. That's the way we approach these proceedings. And so for those who don't know, the rates for digital radio services are, as David alluded to, the rate court that they have, and they go through where there's a federal judge in New York that determines what ultimately has the power to determine what rates the songwriters are able to get. On the sound recording side, we have something similar. It was designed by Congress. It goes through this thing called the Copyright Royalty Board. Every 5 years, the rates for digital radio, for internet radio, are set by the Copyright Royalty Board. And the standard that the
Non-interactive digital
for
radio.
non-interactive digital radio, right? Exactly right. Thank you. So basically, for Pandora, those rates are set by the Copyright Royalty Board. For Spotify, those rates are negotiated fully in the private market, in negotiations between record companies and the interactive services. And so our position going into these proceedings is always, look, to the Copyright Royalty Board, we just think you should set a rate that reflects what the market would do if we didn't have this rate court. And the evidence we look to is largely what happens where there is a market, which is the Spotifys and so on of the world, where there actually are private negotiations that determine the rate. So that's really the perspective that we bring. It's not about what do we get in relation to songwriters. It's about what is a fair price for the recordings, and that's all we ever really fight for.
Okay, Colin, so right now we've got a rate that's set by the CRB, which is about 1/4 cent per song per listener. We've got a rate that Pandora has negotiated, and some of the other pure plays are paying that's about a little bit more than half of that, but essentially half of that, and they're already paying 50% of their revenues as the most successful webcaster. So you're going to come in somewhere between those, or you're going to ask that the royalties go up? Because you said that you think that they should be, you look towards what the interactive services are paying.
So I don't know what our rate proposal is going to be yet. We're still gathering the evidence. Our cases are due early October, and they'll all be public, and eventually everybody's written direct case and proposal will actually be, I think, available on the CRB website. So you could look at it then. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to answer that question.
News. We're not getting any news today. It's terrible.
And I'm sorry, but it's just too early. Because frankly, the market, what I will say is this. One of the things that makes 2014 a lot different than 2009, which is the last time we went through one of these proceedings, is we have a tremendous amount of market evidence. And in particular, we have a tremendous amount of evidence of how powerful and successful a medium internet radio is. One of the benefits of Pandora going public is every quarter we get a really nice sort of insight into their business. And and one of the things that they do is talk about their revenues per 1,000 listener hours as compared to the cost per 1,000 listener hours, and you can track that over time, and you can really see how powerful and effective a platform that really is. But I'll sort of pivot a little bit, and one of the things that we're optimistic about and that I like about this space and about digital radio in particular is it is a platform that actually generates revenue for artists and for recording artists, and I believe in the potential of this space, and I'm very encouraged by the numbers that we're actually seeing in these public filings.
Well, let's come back to that. And David Rosenberg, who works for Beats, but also used to be the general counsel of Live 365, who was essentially the lead service that litigated Web3, the last webcasting royalty case. You want to react to what Colin just said about the success of internet radio and what we've seen in the last 5 years, and also the negotiation of interactive royalties?
Sure. Yeah, I'm kind of stumped here on what I want to say. There's so many things that Colin said I want to respond to.
Start.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously there has been success in internet radio. And I think that's fantastic. I think a lot of the success actually happens to deal with the settlement rates. And I think the fact that Pandora and others have had reduced rates compared to the rest of the non-interactive industry has helped them grow. I think the big problem with the rates today with non-interactive is that there's really no limits on the cost, and that's very different than how we operate as an interactive service. In the interactive world, we sort of form things out of percentage of revenue, and we don't really look at a per play rate. We kind of have a fixed cost, and we know where things are capped. So the fear that I think the non-interactive webcasters have going forward is if we continue to go on a per play where the per play rates continue to increase, is there's really no bounds for these companies to sort of establish their cost and be able to have a fixed fee that they're going to be able to build their service on. So I think I'm most nervous about that. I think there's a lot more evidence than there was when I was doing it, that's for sure. The proceedings are set up so that you don't really have a lot of information as a webcaster. So today you'll have a lot more. I think the rates will be much fairer when these judges make their decision.
Great. And we'll come back to some of the questions about what interactive services are paying and how businesses can survive in this area. Jay, you've written a lot about these subjects. How do you see this all fitting together? Are the artists, we've seen David Byrne complaining about how much money he's getting. We've seen David Lowery from Cracker doing that. How do you react to some of the complaints that we've seen about how much money artists are getting from streaming services?
The biggest hurdle that the industry has as a whole, in my opinion, is that there is a ton of misinformation because the artists, of course, everybody has to internalize it as personal to their lives, and of course the money that they're generating is now at a point where it's significant enough. I mean, now streaming revenue is now 20% plus of all recorded music revenue in 2013. So streaming revenue is now a bigger portion of an artist's life compared to royalties from physical or digital sales. The issue is that there is so much more artists now, so many more songwriters now who have the opportunity to make money. Because when you were in a world where record labels had a finite number of people that they'd sign, and there was a finite number of artists that could get on radio because radio had a fixed number of artists that they'd put on their playlists, you were either in the pool of people that made money or you weren't. Now everybody can jump in the pool. Everybody can go on TuneCore, spend $10, put a single up, and it's up all over the place. And they have the opportunity to go and submit, their songs to internet radio services and streaming services. And as a consumer, we love what Beats Music, as an example, is doing because I can have all these playlists, I can have access to all of these artists, I can listen to all the music that I want. The downside is that now the money that a consumer will ultimately spend gets spread to 10, 20, 30, 40 times the number of artists that it used to. So when it actually trickles down to some of the artists, they're going and seeing a low amount and they're blaming the services. In reality, it's not the services' fault. The services are paying a decent rate. I won't call it a fair rate. As a record company owner, of course, I'm always going to want a little higher rate. But the reality is that it's not a bad rate, and it's certainly not going to be a rate that's going to double anytime soon. So it's not the rate's fault. The fault is that basically the fact that the floodgates went down and everybody gets to play in the pool means that there's a lot more people who are going to get a lot less revenue. And the problem is that when you have a pool now of, like how many, you have 30 million tracks
we have 20 million, but 20 million.
Yeah, 20 million tracks on Beats, which is probably in a pool of roughly, I would say, 800,000 to 1 million artists maybe. So you go and you divide all of that up, and all of a sudden you're going to have, in a pool of 1 million artists, you're going to have 10,000, 20,000 artists who are going to be very, very happy, and you're going to have 980,000 artists who aren't. And that pool of artists who aren't is going to be very vocal. I mean, I'm here also for the Academy of Country Music Award show, and there's the old adage in award show is every time there's an award where there's 5 nominees, there's always 1 winner and 4 people who think that the award show is rigged. It's just every time. It's just, you're always going to have that. You have a bigger pool of people who are going to make a lot of noise, and they're blaming the government. They're blaming the services, and that's absolutely incorrect. The problem is actually the fact that their neighbors can now come in and make money as well, and because it gets divided so thinly, everybody basically ends up griping.
Just to clarify on that point, and I agree with you completely, the way Beats or any other streaming service handles these types of payments with these diverse artists and 20 million songs is really based on the performance, right? So it's not that we cut up the piece a million different ways and pay people different rates. It's based upon the user's use of it. So the market kind of dictates whether or not that artist is actually valuable to to the person who's paid the service.
Absolutely. I mean, you guys are being completely fair. You know, if there's a demand for your song, you will pay, and if it's an outsized demand, you will pay an outsized check.
Right.
And same thing with Pandora, and same thing with every other service. So it really doesn't come down to, it's not the service's fault, it's not the government's fault, it's not rate-setting courts, it's not the deals that are being made. The biggest problem that the artists have in all of this is the fact that every artist gets to play.
Colin, you know, let's look at the internet radio world. Right now, Pandora's, again, paying essentially 1/2 of the standard rate, if you will. And yet their royalties are somewhere in the 40 to 50% of revenues, according to their financial reports. So if they were paying the standard rate, it would be something closer to 80 or 90% of royalties. I've heard from SoundExchange and others that there's a concern about whether services are monetizing sufficiently. Is that really a concern that you all have about internet radio services?
I mean, so I think there are a couple of points there. I mean, in terms of the observation about Pandora's rate and the fact that it is a discount when compared to the standard sort of off-the-shelf rates, there is a piece of that. There is a revenue share component. So it's a lower per performance rate against 25% of revenues. In practice, they've never paid on the 25% of revenues. They've always paid on the per performance rate. That deal was struck in 2009. There was a lot going on politically. There was a lot of there was stuff happening on the Hill related to the webcasting too. I don't want to sort of revisit history, but there is a context for where those rates came from, and they were actually struck under the auspices of this thing called the Webcaster Settlement Act, which gave SoundExchange the ability to do essentially experimental rates that could not be used as precedent, and that sort of, and that was Congress' recognition that Congress recognized that there just needed to be some mechanism to, frankly, put an end to the political issue. It's hard to know what there's no way to do an experiment, right? What would the world look like if Pandora had to pay the standard rates? I think we could say, well, we know their revenues today, and we know what their costs or their cost per hour and their revenues per hour, et cetera, et cetera. I think the fact is, if the rates were higher, they would have done their business a little bit differently. And one of the things we've seen over the past year is, Pandora and other internet radio services and on-demand services do have the ability to control their costs and to manage how their, frankly, how their royalty liabilities fall. And in fact, again, I hate to sort of pick on Pandora. I actually really like those guys in the company, but because they're so public, there's a lot we know about them. Earlier in 2013, they said, "Gosh, we're sort of our usage is getting out of hand. We're going to start capping listening hours for the free users. If you're not a subscriber, after listening to 40 hours of Pandora in a month, you're going to have to pay $1 to keep listening." They did that, and that had an impact on total listening, and a bunch of people went to the subscription part of their business, and so on and so forth. And then later that year, they said, you know what, we don't really need to do that anymore, and they lifted the cap. And so they've demonstrated, an ability to sort of control the impact of the royalty costs if they want to. So I think we would see that.
But by limiting listening. David, why don't you talk?
Real quick on this point. I mean, the thing that I think is absurd about this particular point is that you're asking a successful company to cap usage of a listener. And so when you're really selling the supplier's goods, what supplier wants someone to cap their product and their sale? And that's what's happening here. And I think that's wrong.
Can I one point, and I hate to sort of dominate, which I'm not trying to do, but because I hate it when people do that on panels, but I want to get this point out. One of the challenges that we face with the statutory rates is, by definition, they have to be a one-size-fits-all rate. It has to be something that actually works for everyone.
Not necessarily.
And
I mean, you could set multiple rates for multiple types of services.
Well, you can, and you can have different tiers, but they have to be, generally speaking, available to all comers. And so you have to think, okay, it's not just what's great for Pandora or what's great for Clear Channel. It's got to be a rate or a series of rates that we would be comfortable with anyone in the world using. And we have to really worry about making sure that there are effective minimums to make sure that we don't have high usage but low value services proliferating, and that is one of my biggest concerns in this space, is making sure that the rate structure actually has the right incentives in place so that services know what they have to do in order to build the business. I'm not going to say, oh, I don't think Pandora is trying to make money. They are, clearly. But I do think it's important to have the right benchmarks.
So let's talk about the costs, the operational costs of a service. David, Pandora pays something like 50%. It's been reported in the trade press that more interactive services pay somewhere between 50 and 70% of royalties or revenues for music royalties. What other costs do you guys face in operating a business?
Just to put this in perspective, so on a $10 product, you have, like you said, 50 to 70% go to content costs. That includes the label fees and the publishing fees. So you're left with basically $3 to build your business. And as a streaming service, we don't have a lot of distribution outlets, right? So we're on the web, and maybe we build an app on a mobile device. So you have to pay for fees to get yourself distributed. So if you want to do a deal with AT&T, or you want to do a deal with Sonos, you want to deal with some partner, generally there's some sort of transfer of funds, there's some rev share or something that's happening there. So that deducts from your retail price, your gross revenue. And then on top of that, you have to market, because this is an industry that's new and up and coming, and you got to teach people the value of having all the music on demand, or really any of these music services have to teach. So you have marketing and R&D and expenditures and people and all those things all come within about that 30% bucket. And that's very hard, because we're tech companies. We're building technology, and to operate on $3 out of a $10 product is a very difficult price point for us to work on.
Great. And David. So the major publishers have talked about withdrawing their catalog from ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. That everybody knows ASCAP and BMI and CSAC. In terrestrial radio, you've been paying them forever. They've been there. You pay the 3 services, and you get basically access to all the music that's out there. Now, some of the big publishers are saying, well, maybe we should pull our catalog out and license it directly, because we can get more money that you would charge to the services. What's that all about?
Well, that's about, I think, equity, that they think that between what the sound recording is worth and what the publishing is worth. So what the label gets paid for that performance, and what the publisher is, what their share is of it. And in a typical kind of on-demand music world, where there is agreed upon rates there as well. We don't have the same construct. There's not a government, but it's a willing kind of negotiation, and there's set percentages. 10.5% of revenues are typically what a service such as David's here, as Beats here, that's what they pay for publishing, inclusive of the recording side and the performing side of it. And that works out usually, to what the label's getting as, a 5 to 1, let's say. If they're getting, let's say, $1 and the label's getting, let's say, $5, you have a kind of 5 to 1, on a $10 product. But when you look at, Pandora, and Pandora, reportedly paying, through their filings, 50% of their revenues for the record label side, and in those same filings they pay 4% of their revenues for the performing rights. You have a much wider disparity there. And what we were talking about before, the reasons how do you get to this 4% versus 50% is because of some of this, statutory, regulation that goes into setting those rates. And that's what this, Songwriters Equity Act is about creating a more level playing field across the board. While to your question of why the publishers are pulling out, if the publishers are not bound by the same regulation that the PROs are bound by, and they can go and negotiate open rates with any of these services, and many have, and it's been reported that they've negotiated some rates from internet radio, and they've done better than, got higher rates than the court. We just saw a decision come out of the ASCAP rate court a month ago, and that decision put the rates down acknowledgedly below what the free market got, what the free market, rates
it was supposed to be what the free market gets, willing buyer, willing seller, essentially. A marketplace rate.
Yeah, theoretically, that's what the courts are supposed to set, but the court specifically did not. The court specifically rejected what these rates were, or what the rates were set, because they felt that they were done under some duress, or
Well, we can argue the fine points. Jay, I saw you make a face. Did you have a comment on something, David?
Yeah, because I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this, but I'm really not going to cry over the fact that you have to work on a 30% operating margin, because so many other businesses have to work off of less. There's a reality is like, is a Starbucks cup of coffee, is that going to be 70% of the coffee cost going to go to the cup and the coffee? Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 70%, and then they have to work on the rest of the 30%. So many businesses have to work off of that. It's, I understand it's difficult, but that's why it's a business. My business is difficult too, trying to go and figure out the margins, And then I go and look at the Songwriters Equity Act, and I do believe that songwriters should be making more. But I also think performers should be making more from terrestrial radios, and right now they got a goose egg. There's a lot of things right now. There's a lot of difficulty, and it's very, very unbalanced, the whole thing right now. And I'm not necessarily saying I know all of the right answers, but the reality to me is that, I got to focus my business on just basically saying, can we stop worrying about this? And can we start focusing on actually saying, can we make the whole pie bigger? One of the things that I think that's difficult is we have such a potential in the next 5 years, with the growth of mobile in particular, that this business could grow by billions of dollars for all of us, for artists, for the services, for the songwriters, everything. There's a pool that's set to be had. And I think that the more that we worry and focus really, really difficultly on fighting with each other and hating each other and trying to throw all these different things, they're acknowledged problems, but all that's going to do is slow down our ability to be in the pool. I got artists coming to us on our marketing side to help them with data-driven marketing. And I was thinking about, just because I'm here in Vegas, you have a company like Zappos, and the shoe company has figured out how to better use data to go and market shoes than anybody I know in the music business, movie business, or entertainment business has. Really? Shoes are beating music? That's not fair. We should be on the bleeding edge of this shit. And we're not. And I think that, it's like, I know it's important and I know we got to spend time on it, but right now I'd rather spend the time on just actually saying, let's just work together and make a better product, and let's work to make that product bigger and bolder and more out there, and I think we can then actually get somewhere. That's just my opinion.
I'm 100% in agreement with you here. I was asked to explain what the costs are. I'm telling you what the costs are.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you're the licensor, you have to know what our costs are. And of course we want to work with you and build. You want
to know my costs and then what I should be getting for the cost of actually having R&D on the artist?
I don't want it to be an inhibitor to our growth. Right? So we got to work together to find the right price points that allow the whole industry to grow and do well. But when you're the licensee and your costs are too much for you to get started, not saying necessarily in Beats' case, but for a lot of small guys and whatever, that becomes a problem for everybody. You can't get the scale you need for any service.
Okay, we need to take some questions. Okay, so we're actually running out of time. Yes.
I have a question for David from BMI. So according to your lockdown, Pandora is paying 50% of its gross now for the sound recording rights, and you want more from them because it's inequitable to what they're paying. Are you expecting less money to go to SoundExchange, or should Pandora, let's say, theoretically pay 80 or 90% of its gross for rights?
I don't think we're. I don't think.
The question was, is David expecting Pandora to pay a bigger percentage of their revenues for royalties, or is he expecting Colin's share to go down?
I think that there needs to be some more equity between those rights, and that's what we're saying. Yeah.
I think that answers the question. There needs to be some more equity. I think he's saying Colin's share should go down. Colin's share should go down. Yes, over here.
Everything you've said in this entire discussion is from the rights holder's side. But if you look at the actual service that's occurring in the streaming world, whether a user is using a radio type service or an interactive service, what gets delivered is exactly the same. They get a stream. They get a performance. So why should there be any difference in the licensing and the rates for those two uses?
Somebody who was very active in the aforementioned failed Launchcast, The main difference is there's a significant difference between whether or not a consumer gets a song that they didn't ask for that might be a song they wouldn't have chosen versus a song that they explicitly choose. If they have an active choice to say, this is what I want to hear at this particular moment, there is intrinsically a higher value associated to that, hence why the interactive services pay more. And I do, so we disagree.
The only higher value that was ever associated with that was a physical sale of a product. And that was truly higher value, maybe 10 times or more higher value. But in a world where physical products are disappearing and you're just delivering streams, whether it's on demand or not on demand, makes no damn difference.
Well, it absolutely makes a difference, because if I basically say, I really want to hear the new Beyonce single, and I want to hear it 10 times in a row, versus I'm going to go onto Pandora and pray that the new Beyonce single may get streamed to me. There's a significantly huge difference on that, because I'm going to get all these songs that I didn't want and I wasn't thinking about on Pandora. And so, should everybody, the rights holders, everybody get the same amount of money? I mean, we could debate this a long time.
Question way in the back.
Yeah, just one of the assumptions of this discussion is that when something is streamed, that somebody's actually listening at the other end. And I wonder how you take into account the fact that people turn on their streams and while they're used to listening to over-the-air radio, and they may just let it run all day long. In many instances, people who are turning their computers on or they're listening with other devices, they let them run, but they don't necessarily listen to them. And in the case of streamers, they're, of course, having to pay the fee just because it's running. And that there's not any way you can really control the consumer, but is that ever discussed?
David?
Sure, I can take that. Yeah, I mean, from a non-interactive perspective, like a Pandora or when I was at Live 365, that definitely was, is discussed. And that's why you control your costs. So there are throttles put in place for how many hours you can listen and so forth. So if the consumer is just letting it run in the background and you're not eating up costs. From a subscription service, side of things, for like Beats, that really isn't as big of a concern on our end. I mean, because it's really, we pay a fixed fee kind of for the content, and people pay a subscription cost to us to sort of help cover those costs.
I think
not nearly as big of an issue.
I think in the non-interactive in the radio world, I think it's is there revenue being generated? If the stream's happening and an advertiser's paying to get there, if it's falling on deaf ears, is the advertiser not paying for that ad being served? I mean, if there's revenue being generated for it, then the content that helped sell that ad, should they see part of that?
Yeah, that devalues the advertising if they're not obviously not listening to it, right? So that's the concern. Yeah.
Question over here.
Yeah, in the last 18 months, you've seen some broadcasters making their own deals with the record labels that include both digital and broadcast performance royalties. Is that good because it moves the process forward? Does that disrupt everything?
Yeah, direct licensing. That's a good question.
I guess I'll take that first. So in terms of whether it's good or bad, it sort of is what it is. I mean, I think those things can't necessarily be seen as sort of part of the overall political or economic landscape. They're things that make sense in the context of the particular deals. There is no terrestrial performance right, as Jay said so eloquently. When radio plays a recorded song, the publishers and the songwriters are paid, but the artists and the record labels get a big fat zero. And so what some labels have done is they've said, look, we're going to see if we can, frankly, restructure the economics of digital. That's the way I see it, where there is a rate and a royalty for streaming on digital. I'm going to see if I can restructure the economics that take into account terrestrial revenue, because maybe that'll work better for me.
So, Colin, 1-3, a good deal? You take it?
I honestly just depends exactly on the circumstances and the numbers, so I'm not sure.
You won't commit to anything. David, what's it like to direct license from the service side?
It's great. It's obviously very complex. I mean, with Beats or any of the services I worked with, you have major labels and you have hundreds of indie labels, so you're talking 300, 400 deals, and you have small legal teams, and you have a very high transactional cost to do all of this. And then on top of that, you have to deal with all the publishing. There's tens of thousands of publishers in the United States that are also trying to do deals there. When you go internationally, you have to deal with societies and more labels and whatever. So it's a very complex thing. Not easy to do, and it's costly.
And I'm sure we could spend another hour or so going through a lot of the other complexities. We haven't talked about percentage of revenue. We haven't talked about promotional value of these services. But unfortunately, our time's expired. Please help me in thanking our panelists for at least shedding some light on these issues.
Marketers are increasingly tuning into digital audio as listenership expands. Our next presentation, called Amplifying Digital Audio Measurement, will shine a spotlight on the unique characteristics and market demands of digital audio measurement and provide some insights on a strategy for in-depth audience measurement. Here from Nielsen Audio is Senior Vice President Digital, Jeff Wender.
Thank you, Jennifer. And just real quick, another round of applause for the last section. Jen decided to take the high road by saying no lawyer jokes, and it blew my introduction because I had 3 that I was going to roll out. But it was very fascinating because, at least from my perspective, they all touched upon very important things about how we can help bring more money and more opportunity into the digital audio space. And that's really what I'm interested in talking and sharing some insights today about what we can do as an industry to generate more revenue, more opportunity. And one of the best ways to do that is through improved measurement. Now, just very quickly, by way of introduction, oops, hit a button too quick. By way of introduction, Nielsen is, many of you know, the world leader in market research. Our role, our charter, is to measure what consumers do, what they watch, what they buy, and even most recently, what people are listening to. Nielsen recently acquired Arbitron, the world leader in audience measurement for radio. And as a company, our charter is to better understand where and how consumers are understanding and learning more about products through advertising. And what we would like to do in our charter when it comes to audio is to be able to measure audio as a whole. Historically, Arbitron has been about measuring radio. Our charter is being able to measure audio and all the different ways in which marketers and advertisers can generate more revenue. One of the things that we would like to look and talk a little bit about today is what are some of the challenges in front of us? What are some of the things that are generating revenue in an incredibly growing space in digital audio? And what can we be doing more to bring more marketers, more advertisers to understand how they can take advantage of what is an incredibly growing, fast-moving space? Before we do that, I'd like to start off by diving in a little bit into understanding a bit more about the consumer and what the consumer is doing today with their time and how they're using their leisure. Let's see if we can get this to go. Can you guys in the back just... Okay, there we go. Perfect. So before diving in and talking a little bit about audio, understand how consumers today are using and spending their leisure time. Today, about 60 hours worth of their time is being spent consuming TV, audio, and online. And that's weekdays, weekends, in terms of the entire amount of time people have an opportunity to be advertised and marketed to in terms of all the different ways and the primary ways in which people are advertising today. Next slide. When you look at the predominant ways in the areas in which people are spending the most time, social networking, television, and music all have a significant amount of additional opportunity and a significant amount of additional consumption over all of the other opportunities. And we saw this today in Jason's presentation earlier, talking about where people are spending their time. If we go to the next slide, the area in which you see the greatest amount of growth, and this is information that you are all very well aware and understand, is we see that in streaming. And just between the last 2 years, incredible amount of growth, 40% growth year on year, from 31%, nearly a third of individuals that were consuming streaming music, to almost half, 44% of consumers today are utilizing and taking advantage of these platforms. Again, that's whether it's iHeartRadio, Pandora, Beats, all the different types of services that are being used today. And next slide. And when you take into account other ways, non-traditional ways in which people are consuming digital music and streaming, adding in YouTube, as Jason pointed out earlier in terms of ways in which people are consuming more, even higher, 68%. 24% of individuals today using YouTube to understand and to be able to consume music. So 68%, nearly 7 out of 10 people are streaming music through these different services. Applications, again, it is about mobile. It's about mobile. When we look specifically at applications and streaming music, going from 2008 until just this past year, gone from 5% to 29%, over nearly a 500% growth in the amount of streaming music consumption that's being done in mobile today. This is where people are consuming the vast majority of the music streaming content. More and more we're seeing this in consoles, in TV set-top boxes, the iTunes, the Apple TVs. This is where it's being done, but traditionally mobile applications is where the primary driving activity is taking place. The real challenge, and really it's not about monetizing, because when we see today, there's a tremendous amount of money that's being invested in digital audio. Agencies and advertisers are doing it as more and more people are listening. The real question is not just about monetizing, it's really about maximizing that opportunity. And a lot of what we do as a measurement company, and from a Nielsen perspective, we live in big data. We were big data before big data was as popular and as exciting as it was, and as people started to look at different ways in which to understand more about how people are consuming information. But it's really more about monetizing it and doing it in a way in which you can maximize those dollars. The first big challenge when you look at it is the amount of fragmentation that's taking place and understanding where audio is consuming. 14 hours worth of time is being consumed today in terms of audio. Still, 2 hours a day in terms of drive time, information is being utilized, or time is being utilized to spend in mobile audio and to be able to use this as an opportunity. Driving, at the gym, other opportunities, but in terms of overall, the second biggest opportunity that you have. But when you look at how data is being used and how digital audio is being, how it's being set up to be purchased by advertisers and agencies, digital audio is being established and set up by a new standard, a new digital standard. In a lot of cases, there are traditional ways in which audio is purchased. But it also, digital audio has digital buyers, people that are used to buying display advertisements, video advertisements, understanding how that's being done in a way that's different in how traditional audio is being, the way in which radio is being purchased. And being able to come up with the right metrics and the right information so that agencies can make the right investments, that's what ultimately is the most important. One of the things that we call it is we call it a badge decision. You have, everyone I'm sure here has a badge to get into their building, to get in the front door of their company. Agencies and advertisers have billions of dollars set aside that they're responsible for in terms of justifying where their investments go and where these dollars are being applied. And from an investment standpoint, they make decisions, million dollar decisions on applying money in the right way and in the right places. They need more information and better information to make those types of actionable, intelligent decisions. And with that information, they invest more. And a lot of the feedback that we hear is that today, they are challenged to make the significant investments in digital audio because of the information they have, and they need more. So this is a big piece of what we believe as an industry we can do to ultimately invest more and to get more people to invest in digital audio. Some of those agencies are very clear. They will tell you, and this is the tailwind, that today, digital audio today is keeping audio ad spend from shrinking. That if you take a look at overall ad spend, that those numbers would be going down dramatically if it weren't for the fact that digital audio is helping to create additional opportunity. But at the same time, what they're also saying is that we would be investing a tremendous amount of more money and dollars if we truly understood the audience better and could validate and secure the fact that these particular individuals are indeed there and people that we could validate that we're advertising against. So a lot of what we're doing and what advertisers and agencies talk to us about is we need more information. We need better information to help justify these investments, and we need to be able to apply that in a way that is not just directional but actionable, in ways in which it can establish a currency so people can transact on it. We see those in 3 buckets. The first is understanding the reach, understanding specifically how many people are being exposed to audio consumption, to these different audio platforms, and being able to validate and ensure that that audience is exactly who is being marketed to, that what ultimately what the publisher is recommending and saying that they're delivering this particular audience is indeed what they're getting. The second piece is resonance. Beyond just being able to identify the specific number of people that are ultimately there, understanding that you are able to make a brand impact, that you are ultimately in a position where you're delivering strong information that can deliver the message and ultimately deliver strong brand recall. And lastly, reaction, the last piece, which is really focusing on understanding how effective the ads are and can you tie specific dollars to that. Oops. Now, there's a couple of key areas that, man, I'm having all kinds of trouble with this mouse today. Can we go back a slide, please? Thanks. It's all right. No, it's fine. So in terms of understanding the reach elements of it, what agencies and advertisers are asking for is the ability to have comparability. Being able to measure advertisements between traditional audio and digital measurement by the same benchmarks. So they can be able to understand from an apples-to-apples perspective how people are consuming the audio content in their advertisements. They also want to understand validated demographics. Who specifically are the people that are consuming these advertisements? Understanding the age, gender, ethnicity, doing it in ways that are provided by third-party independent information that is not based upon user-defined or specific information that's provided directly from the user themselves that hasn't been validated. Lastly, the ability to understand cross-platform, to be able to understand how that compares against television as well as video advertisements and display. Because today, in a lot of the different ways in which we've seen in which advertisements are being done, a lot of that is being done not just with traditional audio measurements, but with multimedia, with display advertisements, and there's traditional ways in which those are being done. They want to see that it's optimized delivery. They want to make sure that the audience in which is being targeted is indeed what's being delivered. They want to be able to reconcile it in the same way they do today in digital, as well as what's taking place today in television. That if you ultimately deliver a guarantee, that you're indeed hitting that audience and you know that you're delivering against those specific impressions. They want to make it transactional, built into all the buying systems so they have the ability to make it very seamless. And lastly, to have a census measurement, to be able to capture the entire audience. Earlier they talked about whether or not you're capturing it at the server level, but ultimately understanding directly whether a consumer is listening to it at the device. That's an area that we heavily want to focus on and try to figure out ways to capture more information directly at the device level. Oops. Can we go back one slide, please? So the last two pieces are what we call reaction and resonance. Resonance is measuring brand effectiveness. And one of the areas where Nielsen has done a tremendous amount with traditional radio is measuring whether advertisements from a brand perspective can ultimately be as effective or more effective than other mediums. This is an area that digital has an opportunity to be even more effective with, because the ability to identify specific users who are listening to and exposed to ads, providing that information back to understand how the exposure was. Did it increase purchase intent and brand intent? Those are areas in which we have an ability to provide more information. And then lastly, in terms of reaction, creating closed-loop systems so that we have the ability to see specifically from a dollar-for-dollar perspective how investments in traditional radio, when someone invests $1, what is the incremental lift that you receive? And big data today allows us to do that. We have the ability to be able to identify when someone is exposed to an advertisement, are they actually going and making a purchase offline? Not just within the digital domain, a lot of examples earlier about how that can be done entirely in an online setting. But specifically how we can do this in offline to understand whether purchases take place. Recently at the ARF, Nielsen participated in a study where we identified that $1 created $1 in advertisement created $6 of incremental lift in traditional radio. With digital and the ability to be much more targeted with respect to specific audiences, this provides us an ability to do a whole lot more and understand it a lot better. So ultimately, there's an opportunity to do a tremendous amount more than what's being done today. We had the ability to understand more about what digital audio consumers are doing with respect to their outreach, what they're listening to, as well as to understand after the fact, are they ultimately making purchases, increasing the investment. Once we provide this information to the agencies and to advertisers, it will give them a lot more confidence in what digital audio can bring, and will ultimately bring a lot more money and revenue into digital audio for us to grow that pie the way that I think we all believe the opportunity provides it. Thank you.